Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversants are Aaron Kindsvatter, Leslie Elliott, and Jennifer Friend. All three of these folks are counselors or coaches or psychologists or therapists of varying degrees and of varying disciplines. And in this conversation, we talk about the capture of psychological and therapeutic schools, professional organizations, up to and including licensing bodies. In the beginning, we focus on a complaint that was made against Aaron and how he was investigated for a complaint that could have risked his therapeutic license, even though the complaint had nothing to do with his therapeutic practice. And then from there, we get a little deep and talk about the psychology of this thing that is called wokeness, which according to Twitter nowadays is akin to using the N-word. If you can imagine that, the wokesters don't want us to even name that which is causing so much problems in our society and in the therapeutic profession, and that can actively be damaging the most vulnerable people by indoctrinating them into an oppressor-oppressed dynamic. That spiel went on a little bit longer than I intended, so let's get on with the show. Here is Aaron, Leslie, and Jennifer.
Outstanding.
Love that yellow room.
Oh, this is my office. I know it's so nice here.
I love the backdrop too, with just a clock and a little painting or a picture.
I really want your face to start melting like a Dali painting. Hopefully we can.
Yeah, it's the clock, isn't it?
I think it's the color scheme and the clock. It's very
yeah.
So I was reading through this neurotic rant about you. Somebody went through all your Twitter follows and wrote a whole screed about how evil you are to resist a global movement to free everybody from racism except for white people. And has this been taken seriously by the institution? Is this like a foundational text in your persecution?
Yes, it has been. In fact, the board, so mental health professionals are granted their license to practice mental health by a board of professionals. And in the state of Vermont, that's called the Board of Allied Mental Health Professionals, which operates under the Office of Professional Regulation. So they took this complaint and then they opened an investigation into me, a formal investigation of my psychotherapy practice. The complaint is about what I said in my role as a university professor. It was essentially taken from a video that I made a few years ago, and my objections to the inclusion of Kendi's version of anti-racism and D'Angelo's ideas about whiteness into counselor training and higher education. And it was like a 9-minute video where I essentially said, that these are really bad ideas, and we should not be including these as informing what we're doing in higher education. And we certainly should not be including these as material that would be relevant to holding a therapeutic conversation with somebody. Because if one were to utilize anti-racism as Kendi describes it, or was to engage with a client around a white fragility dialogue, as D'Angelo has described it, they would be in direct violation of the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics, which clearly states in non-ambiguous terms that counselors do not impose their values, their behaviors, their beliefs onto their therapy clients. And in other words, it is unethical to indoctrinate therapy clients you can't do it. So I very naturally spoke up when this began to be included in counselor education curricula. And that's what the complaint appears to be about. The reason the state of Vermont comes into this is because it's the state of Vermont who grants licensure, not any university. But of course, the state of Vermont is a government agency that is required to abide by the First Amendment. So the complaint really should not have moved forward when it was sent to the state of Vermont, and yet it did. And when I got the complaint, which I'll just describe it for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's pages and pages and pages of complaints about, essentially saying that I'm a terrible professor and I'm a terrible person. It appears disjointed and dysregulated, and there's some zany things in there. One of which I still don't get is that a tweet that I made liking Duran Duran is included in there. I don't know what this person has against Duran Duran, but that's really the only part of this that makes me upset with the complainant. I'm like, okay, say I'm a white supremacist, say I'm a racist, but I'm sorry, when it comes to Duran Duran, if you don't like them, I'm afraid you just have no musical taste whatsoever. That's as far as my anger at the complainant goes. So when, the board sent me this, and I said to them, and they said, "You're under investigation. Here's the complaint." And I said, "Well, what am I supposed to do with this?" And she said, "Just go through each line of the complaint and explain yourself."
Oh.
And this is like, I don't know. I don't even know how many pages of this it is, but I was like, I'm not going to, first of all, it would take weeks. And second of all, I don't know. What do I say to the fact that someone doesn't like that I like Duran Duran? Like, what can I say? Like, how do I respond to this? And so what I did is I sent it to the lawyer, and at the time, my income was pretty insecure. And so my lawyer, God bless her, Sam Harris, spent pro bono time responding to the board. And she pro bonoed $1,300 worth of work to essentially say, this complaint should have never gone forward, and none of this violates the First Amendment. And essentially, I think Sam didn't even know what to say because it was just so bizarre. So I don't know.
And how did they respond to that? Did they end?
About 6 weeks later, I got a formal letter that said, it was found that you did not violate any counseling law.
Okay.
And, which is fine, but it didn't really resolve the issue. I was left uncomfortable because they investigated it in the first place, which really they should not have done. Because this has tremendous implications for anyone who counts on the state to provide a license for their livelihood. It really has important ramifications for person's ability to speak up around these issues. In fact, since I talked publicly about this on the Solid Ground channel that Leslie and that Jen are a part of, and I got many, many, many emails from counselors who are in Vermont saying, "Thank you. I wish in that email, I have a letter that I wrote to the governor saying, hey, essentially it appears that the board might have, infringed on free speech rights here, possibly for purposes of political retribution, can you pass some kind of legislation to ensure that investigations are made in good faith and expressly not for the purposes of political retribution? And many people thanked me for that and said that they didn't dare to send this nicely worded letter, short little letter, to the governor for fear that there would be retribution. So apparently there are already many, many mental health providers in Vermont who feel that if they are to speak up on this issue, there might be ramification for their careers. That is really scary stuff. So so
cowardice kind of tired of it, but I guess people have to make their own calculations with their livelihoods, and I do understand that, but they're doing it in mass and watching all professional organizations tank into the sea. Just like, oh, I want to protect my children and my little house. And if 20 years down the road, my kid will be, subjected to massive amounts of indoctrination, at least I got my little nest egg for them and they can go ride a motorcycle.
I'm really disappointed by the American Counseling Association, because this is a larger, we could have a whole video based on this, but they're essentially allowing policies into a place that will give persons who are invested in politicizing psychotherapy a workaround the existing ethics that say that you're not supposed to impose your beliefs or your behaviors onto your clients.
And what are those workarounds? Do you guys have any examples of?
Yes, there's a document out there. It's called the Multicultural and Social Justice Counseling Competencies. It's available online for anyone who wants to read it, and it's was endorsed by the American Counseling Association Governing Council, and it essentially provides both permission and a map for the indoctrination of clients during counseling sessions.
Great.
And the inclusion of anti-racism in counselor education curriculum also provides a map for that kind of indoctrination. There is an article out there that provides a 5-step model on how to use very subtle manipulation tactics in order to get a client to adopt, essentially a far left point of view. And that involves shaming, that involves using manipulation to somehow connect, say, a person's depression or their anxiety attacks to connect anti-racism with that.
Okay, great.
And
awesome.
it's just awful. People can look that article up. It's called "Talking with Your White Clients About Race." I just want to say real quick, this is not a problem for white people either. I'm not suggesting like this is a white people issue, because I'm sure that this author and persons who think like them also have a lot of ideas about talking with black people about race and how they can be, quote, black enough. So it's awful stuff. It's dehumanizing stuff. Amazing. And it's an obvious breach of professional ethics, and yet it's tolerated and nobody is speaking up about it much. It's both fascinating and horrifying to watch this going on within the profession.
It's I read that article, and it really, number one, it's frightening to think that you might go to a therapist and the therapist is secretly planning on indoctrinating you versus helping you with your problems. But I feel worried about the future of our field if this continues, because I think it really destroys our credibility as mental health professionals and really damages trust. And I'm really I'm very embarrassed by it.
Yeah, it is embarrassing, isn't it, Jen? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what it shows is that the field is not the field cannot be responsible for regulating itself. And that's always embarrassing. I mean, that makes every member seem like an adolescent because no one has stepped up and say, no, I'm sorry, this is wrong. We were actually quite serious when we wrote our code of ethics, and we stand behind them. What we're essentially saying as a field is, yeah, we wrote a code of ethics, but, counselor competence, I guess you can go ahead and do a workaround. Cultural competence, you can go ahead and do a workaround. What it suggests is that the leaders in the profession, are not willing to stand behind the principles that they helped create, and that diminishes the field, and by association, it diminishes the people who are licensed by the field and who use the field as a professional home. And that's to say nothing of the endangerment to patients who come in who are extremely vulnerable to psychological manipulation.
To get a little abstract or philosophical or psychological, what is the psychological content of the concept of white fragility? Like what is going on if somebody came into one of your relationships, your professional relationships, and they exhibited this desire to inculcate everyone they were around with this white fragility concept? How would you diagnose them? I know this might not be ethical, so you guys can avoid the question, but I'm just interested about what are the mechanics of this thing that's being inserted? And
the diagnosis for the person who wants to indoctrinate? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Well, what would be the mechanics that would drive somebody to want to do that?
Aaron has an answer.
Is he going to go grab the DSM?
I've actually been reading about that.
Oh.
Erich Fromm, The Heart of Man. Would you mind if I read from this a little bit?
Please.
So this is, I've been meaning to read this book for years, and I just happened to pick it up the other day. And I was wondering about this question, Benjamin, why do people do this? In many instances, the outcome is that a disappointed person remains skeptical and hopes for a miracle that will restore his faith. Tests people when disappointed in turn by them, tests still others, or throws himself into the arms of a powerful authority, the church or a political party or a leader, to regain their faith. This paragraph is talking about a person who is left feeling directionless and hopeless, and he uses the word impudent, that meaning that not effective in life. Often he overcomes his despair at having lost faith in life by frantic pursuit of worldly aims, money, power, and here it is, prestige. The reaction that is important in the context of violence, and I might replace violence with destructiveness here, is still another one. The deeply deceived and disappointed person can also begin to hate life. If there is nothing and nobody to believe in, if one's faith in goodness and justice has all been a foolish illusion, if life is ruled by the devil rather than God, then indeed life becomes hateful. One can no longer bear the pain of disappointment. One wishes to prove that life is evil, that men are evil, that oneself is evil. The disappointed believer and lover of life thus will be turned into a cynic and a destroyer. This destructiveness is one of disrepair, disappointment in life that has led to a hate of life. The Heart of Man by Erich Fromm talks about the moral decay associated with needing to find sort of destructive and negative ways of defining people and of viewing themselves and society and their roles in society. And a lot of these views, let's take the idea of whiteness. It's based on our very basest understanding of ourselves and others. It's a terrible set of ideas that, any third grader would recognize as stereotypical and dehumanizing. And yet this is what's considered political refinement right now.
Cynical and nihilistic.
So if someone came in, and they had, a deep desire to, I don't know, to view themselves and others in very circumscribed terms, I guess what I would do is try to provide. Carl Rogers had this idea that people lose a sense of self when they are subjected continuously to conditions of worth that they feel like they can never meet. And so they end up, leading very narrow, very frightened kinds of lives. And that when you provide a person with a certain set of relational conditions, those being unconditional positive regard, genuineness, and empathy, that those psychological conditions are what soil, sunlight, and water are to a seed. That if you provide a person with those interpersonal conditions within the context of therapy, they will naturally grow and become much more complex. And that, it's Leslie made the point when we were talking about this one time. She made the point that how can you write a paper in your counseling training program about Carl Rogers in one class, and then in the next class go over and hear about white fragility, and then you're either a racist or an anti-racist, and so are your clients. And your clients might exhibit white fragility, so you have to force them into a certain way of being. It's so contradictory that it almost leaves one speechless.
I don't really, along the lines with what you're saying, I have a very hard time understanding why therapists do not recognize Robin DiAngelo's ideas and her tactics as being abusive.
Yeah.
She says that when you're talking to white people about race and racism, and she lists the different reactions that they might have, and each reaction, she gives that as an example of their fragility and their racism. So it's this circular logic. It's a Kafka trap. There's a lot of gaslighting involved as well. And a lot of people who've been in abusive relationships in particular are very sensitive to these ideas. If they go to a training and they're exposed to this, they say, hey, this is exactly the kind of thing that my abuser would do. No matter what I say or do, it's taken as evidence against me. And so I don't understand how therapists cannot recognize this as abusive. It really makes me feel crazy, because to me, it's so obvious.
It just really is.
No,
and you do hear it from people who have been in abusive relationships where, someone's comes in and they're kind of like, this person told me that I needed to do this, and that I would only please him if I did these things, and I needed to always do more to please him. I see that same pattern in abusive relationships all the time. As a marriage and family, person who sees marriage and family patients all the time. I see that pattern, and it's the exact same pattern. It's like you're never quite, you're never quite okay. There's always more that the abusee has to do in order to please the abuser.
Right.
It's such a misuse of power. And this is taken as a kind of refinement in counseling training programs. I just don't get it. I really don't.
I really don't either. And one of the things that I noticed in that complaint about you was that it says, and this is kind of poorly written, but the person who wrote it said he endorses an inability to endorse the ideas of Kendi and D'Angelo. So that person is arguing essentially that if a professor or a therapist doesn't endorse those ideas, they should not be practicing. And the fact that the board investigated you suggests that the board thought that had some level of merit. So our license now saying that if their licensees do not endorse particular ideology, that they're unfit to practice under their license.
Isn't that scary, Jen?
It's terrifying.
Yeah, because she said because the complainant says not just a lot of disjointed stuff like that. Like it's a crime to say, I don't think what Kendi and D'Angelo have to say is wise. In fact, I think it's the opposite of wisdom. And that in and of itself, like the board is saying, please explain yourself. Under that comment, explain yourself.
Well, I mean, to be a little generous, maybe they are looking to you for guidance on how to dismiss this, right? I mean, just on the outside chance of being as optimistic as possible, maybe they don't have the resources and they haven't investigated this, and they see somebody who has investigated this and has a counterpoint to it. Somebody's in like, well, if we can get this on the record, then we can probably build a case against these sorts of complaints and maybe even flush out the CRT stuff from.
Well, they didn't. If they wanted education, they didn't ask me. What they did do is they sent someone to photograph the building I work in, to photograph the mailbox of the building that I work in, and they cost my lawyer $1,300. So I would suggest that if this is the board's thinking, a phone call saying, "Hey." Could you help us with that? Would be a lot better option than misusing the power of the state as an investigation. Because here's the other thing: like, yes, of course, I was found innocent of any wrongdoing. That was blatantly obvious. Blatantly obvious. But still, they investigated, and I keep asking myself why, and the only answer I can come up with is they also don't like the fact that I'm speaking out against Kendi and D'Angelo, and that the investigation is the only punishment that they are able to level. It almost doesn't matter if you're found guilty or not, because the punishment or the investigation in and of itself is a punishment, because you respond to them. It costs money. If I had done what the board wanted me to do and like provide an explanation under every line of this like long, disjointed, nebulous document, it would have taken me weeks and to think of a thoughtful answer to all of this. And then you get to sit around for 6 months saying, hey, I know that whole has no merit, but I sure hope this doesn't impact my livelihood.
Yeah.
So the board, as far as I can tell, acted, if not in an actively malicious, vengeful kind of manner, then they acted in an incompetent manner. And I don't think there is any. I don't think the fact that we're looking to help you and others find a way to set some kind of useful precedent, that puts the onus on me, and it's not my job to help them function in the way that they're supposed to. Although I'd be happy to if they asked. But they didn't ask. They used the power of the state to investigate me.
And they have the power to dismiss complaints. They do not have to. There's no guidelines that state that they have to investigate every complaint that comes through. They can set aside a complaint as a nuisance complaint, irrelevant, vexatious. For people who are enjoying right now trying to leverage the power of the state against people who disagree with them and think this is all a very good thing and it's morally justified, how would they feel if there was a massive far right takeover and the far right used that against them? Or, unless you're a Christian nationalist, you really shouldn't be practicing under licensure. And
are you showing enough patriotism in your work?
Exactly. It just shows how actually illiberal and totalitarian the people who embrace the critical social justice ideology are.
Yeah. What have you done to eradicate transgenderism from the public conversation today?
Right.
Let's give 3 examples.
I think your point is very well taken, Jen, because what the board has done, and this is their fault. Like, they have to live with this. If in 10 years there's a radical change, and this happened in the last, right leading up to the election where Biden won over Trump. They were talking about DEI and pushing DEI. And I was trying to make the point at the time that, listen, if you push an abject political agenda, that opens the door for the pushing of abject political agendas. And so what the board has done is said, hey, we're open for business. All you need is a majority. And so now if, say, the right takes over the board, then they say, well, further precedent says that if we don't kind of like what somebody says, we can just initiate an investigation. So that person it will seem really patriotic. I mean, someone said that I don't know that America is a racist and a sexist country. That doesn't sound patriotic. Not sure it's a violation of, counseling law, but let's just open an investigation anyway. But I don't get why I can only assume must be intelligent people don't understand the implications of what they're doing.
It's, as we all know, this isn't just one organization, one professional organization. It's not even the elected government. It's reams upon reams upon reams of unelected officials in every single walk of life. They don't need to worry about this. Furthermore, they've been selected to not worry about this. You can't get that far anymore unless you believe in this stuff and you swim in it all the time that you've already accepted it. They're so far ahead that it doesn't really matter. It's never gonna bite their butt unless something really, really big happens. And I don't see that happening. One data point being the amount of people who aren't speaking up. The other data is the amount of political will that needs to happen to root out every professional organization, root out every DEI department in every university. Right? They're all in cahoots, and it's not even intentional. The system itself has selected the system to perpetuate itself by selecting people who perpetuate the system. I mean, that's my black pill. That's my elite theory dissident point of view.
Well, maybe there needs to be, maybe the idea is not going to be rooting out DEI, but providing alternatives with the universities that have a different vision. And there's something really exciting happening at the University of North Carolina, where, what they've done is they've opened a new college there within the university, or a new school that is focused specifically on a liberal education. So they're offering classes that have titles like Capitalism and Its Critics, Communism and Its Critics. They're trying very hard to provide a balanced, comprehensive education, and in a sense, non-ideological experience. And I think the
competitive
University of North
setting.
Yeah,
I think it's false to think that it's non-ideological, but it's a competitive ideological
you're
landscape.
providing people with alternatives. And if mental health continues down this road, I think that the people, and I think most of us as counselors and psychologists and, social workers are not at all interested in indoctrinating our clients. And yet the people who are not interested are terrified to speak up. Yeah. And so it could be at some point that those of us who are not on board with this are going to have to find a way to distinguish ourselves from those people who are.
Oh,
and maybe that just means becoming a part of an organization like the International Association of Psychology and Counseling, which is which says very clearly that they are non-ideological. And they're non-political. And, so maybe on our Psychology Today profiles, where many of us get most of our clients, there can be a button that would say, I don't even know what I would call it, but, I don't inject politics into therapy.
Well, why not just weave a six-pointed star on your chest and then walk around so that you can identify each other and the political enemies?
One of the problems with this is that right now, younger, or not even younger, but newer people coming into this field are having to run through this social justice gauntlet in their education programs, because it seems like it's pretty universal. I mean, there may be exceptions, but it sounds like most programs right now have really been captured by this and the social justice competencies and the multicultural counseling competencies are being infused into KCREP accredited programs across the board. So, we need not just an alternative designation and like certification or professional network, but also an alternative for educational training programs, and schools that are going to distinguish themselves as saying we're not playing that game.
Yeah.
Or a detox program for somebody to get like accreditation or whatever.
Like a deprogramming?
Deprogramming program.
Yeah, but the problem I have with that is like the whole idea of sinking $40,000-$60,000 or more into a training program where you're having to violate your conscience every day. Who comes out of that unscathed? I mean, you come out of that a mess. I mean, I certainly feel like I've come out of that a mess, having to, fight to keep my conscience clean and go along and get the grades and write the papers and, trying to decide every day how much you're going to speak up and how much you're just going to keep your head down. That shouldn't be a part of your educational process in order to come out of it and join a profession.
The long-term stress of that every day and that constant, people I talk to that are in programs right now getting their master's in a mental health related field, they said every day they go into the class and it's that weighing. Is this the battle that I should pick? Is this the hill I want to die on? Is it better to remain quiet? Can I live with myself if I remain quiet? What's the right thing to do here? It's really terrible. And this should not be part of people's education. It should be about mental health and learning how to serve clients and being the best therapist or caseworker or whatever area you're going into.
Yeah, and it's psychological torment. And the thing that you both brought up, Erin, you mentioned the contrast between Rogerian principles and philosophy versus the anti-racism, for instance, the anti-racist indoctrination and using your clients as a means to an end for indoctrination. And then Jennifer, you brought up the how we should be able to see these as abusive tactics, this Kafkaesque, this like circular, white fragility. Oh, you don't agree with me because of your own problems, So these and holding those every day, going into this whirlwind of I don't know, I want to use a bad word, but I'll say mind effery, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But, it's just, you don't come out of that ready to launch into, okay, I've gotten out of that. I've got my master's. Now let me go to the, put that like seal on my Psychology Today profile. I'm ready to go. I mean, you would take deprogramming, and who wants to go through that? Why are we putting up with this? We need to change education.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
It's not just changing the product, but we need to change the process.
What's the can we get a little bit more specific on the effects of being submitted to a moral quandary every time, being subjected to some sort of interrogation constantly? What are the effects of that, and what are the strategies for survival? Do you double yourself? Do you adopt some sort of multiple personality disorder? Dissociative identity disorder or something like that? Do you trans away your basedness, and you just become super social justice cringe until the gauntlet's been passed? Like, what are the effects of this, and how do you counter them?
I mean, there is a. We could spend hours on this question, but there's a book called "The Rape of the Mind" by Merleau, which it describes the process by which political prisoners are forced to change their minds to the point where they really start to believe it. And it involves a combination of shaming and confession, which are both in subtle ways, which are, I can tell you that students entering into, mental health training programs, almost the first thing that you're told is that you are harmful, just the way you are. Even if you're a good-hearted person, you are harming minorities. And no matter if you think that you're a good person or not, you are harming minorities, and we're going to teach you how not to do that. And that's so the shame button begins to be pushed right away. And shame as a human emotion is so aversive, is so painful, that people will do almost anything to avoid it. But it's also so powerful that if you keep pushing it over and over and over again, people have to do a little moral check on every time you say something like, you're not following the tenets of anti-racism because you think capitalism is a good thing. Therefore, you're complicit with racism. So someone says that to you once, it's sort of like, whatever. When you hear it over and over and over again, and then, you're in a class where the tenets of anti-racism become the accepted in-group belief, you're then subjected to group pressure. And so it really throws the person psychologically off balance. It's the same tactics that are used in abusive relationships. And people really begin to believe this about themselves. And it's really hard to shake because it hits at a very... The shame is processed on a... it's not processed through the medial prefrontal cortex where our executive functioning takes place. It's processed through the amygdala, and it's much harder. Emotions are much harder to sort of moderate than thoughts.
Well, are there programs which would probably be a narrative that a human being can hold to that acts as a guard against the intrusion of exterior shame? into their moral matrix. Because I was submitted to this stuff not as deeply, but still at Evergreen. Like, and I know you guys have both seen that. Leslie, more recently, you were, but it just. I was a little older, and I instinctively knew that my shame as a person, it's between me and God. Like, only God can judge me, and I can't judge anybody else anyway. So you guys are going to try to judge me, but you're no one. You're no one. And what I face is eternal, and you're nothing. Your opinions are really nothing. So I'll make you laugh and try to make you have a good time while we're sharing this moment here, but you cannot invade my relationship between me and that thing. So I have that. For people who don't have that, I'm wondering if there are other narratives, if there are other orientations or contexts or frameworks that allow that stuff to wash right through you or wash right off of you. If you guys have any ideas on that.
I do have a couple of ideas about that, and then I have to go in a few minutes, but I have two ideas. Three. One, I absolutely think that education, there has to be a requirement that education includes counter manipulation training. And, call it, and so what that would include is a deep dive into the use of sophistry. Like, what are the tools of sophistry? Making a plausible sounding, emotionally appealing argument that can't ultimately stand up to serious inquiry. People need to be able to recognize that and and that would be useful for whether a person is on the right or the left, because although the left uses this copiously right now, I can remember times when people on the right have used sophistry to get people on their side. So there needs to be counter manipulation training ingrained throughout the curriculum. Second, people need to understand, and this is a hard lesson to learn, that people like D'Angelo are not writing from a position of good faith. That I think that people are too quick to believe that because somebody says they are operating from a position of good faith, or they're operating from a position of wanting to protect minorities and do good works, that they are in fact doing that. So you need to be willing to not suspend disbelief just because someone presents themselves as a good person, or is being presented as a good person. And third, join a group like Solid Ground, because no matter how strong your personality is, no matter how resilient you are as a person, if enough people keep poking this shame button, you will begin to question reality. And what I have noticed about participating in the counterweight groups and having friends like all of you is that it's essential for me to come in and get a reality check every now and then, because this can, regardless of who you are, how many degrees you have, or how secure you are as a person, the manipulative tactics that they are using are abusive, and they're incredibly effective, and that they can knock anybody off balance. So have a group. And it used to be that you could get groups through the organization Counterweight. Now, Solid Ground, if I may say, Leslie and David and Jody and Jen are doing just a fantastic job with that group, and it's a place that everyone can go and just have a reality check once in a while.
I know you need to go, Aaron, but could you stand right next to your clock? I want to see how big it is. Can you hug it? I want to see how big that clock is.
I will in a second, but I have a request. Listen, I have a letter that I wrote for Governor Scott, and I was wondering if he would consider, for anyone who wants to sort of get involved in a little bit of advocacy. I have a script of a letter that people could write to Governor Scott, and I wonder if you would consider putting it in the notes of this video, so that if people want to write to Governor Scott, maybe those who are concerned about this, if our audience is big enough, maybe we can enact a change and start a conversation at the state level to have some good come out of this. This unfortunate event, because this is much larger than just me as a person. I don't like it. It makes me angry. But this has tremendous implications for the health of the profession. If no one feels that they can speak out against some clearly ethically unsound and abusive practices in psychotherapy, if the professionals don't feel free, or they feel like there's going to be retribution in the form of an investigation, that's terrible for everybody. It's especially terrible for the patients who are seeking psychotherapy because they have had awful experiences of being indoctrinated during a DEI training or an intersectionality class or something like that. Yeah. That said, allow me to oblige.
This thing is huge.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh.
Big clock.
Oh, it's bigger than I
thought. Yeah, as I get older, my clocks need to be bigger. I can't see as well. Hey guys, it was great to see you all, and I've got to run.
All right, Aaron, thanks for swinging by.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and I really enjoyed it.
Good to see you, Aaron.
Nice to see you, Aaron.
Yeah, I think he made a couple of really great points about to your question about insulating yourself from this kind of stuff. And I'll say that I've said this before. I think one of the reasons that I felt a little bit more secure in speaking up and a little more personally insulated was the age thing, like you brought up, Benjamin. I being older and just having a little more, I guess, ego strength and a little bit more personal development behind me. I knew who I was better, was good. And I think that one of the reasons has been so effective is that where we're seeing this crop up is in trainings and education for younger people. Like it's starting in younger and younger ages. But my daughter was getting a lot of this in school, and I didn't really realize how much until we've sat down more recently and talked about it. And she's like, oh yeah, we had the genderbread person. She's 24. And so they did the genderbread person when she was in middle school. Like, I didn't know that. But you see these kids coming up now who have been steeped in this stuff before they had the personal sort of development. But he's also right that even that wasn't a full insulation for me, for sure. I still did that loop of checking and the shame and the checking and the needing a reality check.
Yeah, I had to spend 5 years decimating the institution to really exact my vengeance and clean the shame from my dark heart.
Well, you're still doing a great job with that, with what you've been doing. You're decimating it pretty well.
I don't know. It's so odd to meet all these people that are doing so many things, and I'm just a guy with a webcam still. But so odd.
Oh my gosh, but it helps people because it helps them know that they're not alone, and it helps people being exposed to different points of view, helps people think through this. A lot of people that come to our groups, by the way, mention your podcast is something that's been really helpful to them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing. I relate, by the way, to what you were saying earlier about, my conscience is between me and God, and I have to kind of do a deep dive and look at myself and not allow other people to determine for me kind of who I am and if I'm okay or not. Because this is like a massive case of projective identification where these ideologues are projecting onto other people parts of themselves that they don't want to own. And projective identification is when you take that in oh, yes, I must be racist. Oh, yeah. Well, you say I'm doing harm. Yes, I must. And it's easy to fall into that because they are coming at you in a way that they are so convinced, and they are, highly organized, and they're also bullying. And so people fall into that because of shame, because of fear, because of constant exposure to it. And so to have that a sort of a psychological boundary where you say, wait a second, any ideas that I'm exposed to, I am going to think them through myself. I'm going to seek out different points of view. I'm going to do some reading from different sources, not just, I'm told to read D'Angelo, so I read D'Angelo. I'm going to look at different things and come to some conclusions on my own. Boundaries are really our friends now more than ever. We really need boundaries.
I was going through my archives on Evergreen, and I came across this one of my first professors at Evergreen, who turned out to be one of the more fervent or fundamentalist wokesters by the end of it. She took a break in the middle of that 4 years that I was there, and she went on an she went to an artist retreat or stipend. They give you the stipend. I can't remember what it's called, but you go.
Colony.
Yeah, colony. Something like that.
A sabbatical?
Kind of a sabbatical / she was invited to this place, and she just worked on her art, which is printmaking. She's really a very competent artist. But the whole time she was there, and she wrote this blog entry for that website of the place that she went, was about meditating on this black woman's murder at the hands of police. And you see the whole, just this worshiping of the black dead body, and she has this picture of her tearing down this Confederate statue with a clothesline tied around her neck and pulling him down, and just the level of sadomasochism going on in there. You can see the morality from the outside, but looking at it from the outside in, and then seeing how she was a part of this huge program at Evergreen, where they became more and more explicitly religious and ritualistic with the entire thing. They really summoned up this stuff, and there was this really, really, and they had no sense of cringe. That's one thing that I think saves people, like having a sense of cringe, because why are you guys talking like this? What are you talking about? Because I would be at that canoe meeting, which is a really famous, just this absurd meeting, and years later, she becomes an emeritus. A couple years ago, she becomes an emeritus, and she gives a speech at graduation, which was all online because of the COVID stuff. And she went out of her way to justify that canoe meeting. She went out of her way to say, some people out there don't really understand what we were trying to do. And I knew she was talking at me because I've raked her over the coals, basically, So it was really weird that she's still defending her religion and defending her love of these minority students and how much she sacrifices for them. And maybe I can ask you guys another question. We could wrap up if you guys want to answer this one. This is kind of a tricky one, but as women, there's this concept of the longhouse that's kind of going around in kind of the right, in the right now, where Heather McDonald has written very recently an article about the predominance of females in higher education, how it's pretty skewed, 2 to 1, if not more. So I'm wondering if you guys have any insight into the female psychology, or how to balance the female psychology if it becomes so predominant that it starts to elicit this devouring mother, over compassion, over empathy, over determination of the identity characteristics and the victimhood. And as, I think I really want women's input into that critique of the over feminization that seems to be prevalent in a lot of these hyper woke spaces. So I wonder if you guys have any insights on that.
It's a thought. It's a thing I've been trying to think about and trying to figure out what I think about for a while. You asked a question kind of like that the last time we talked too. It was a different flavor, but sort of similar theme. And in terms of like the masculine and the feminine, I feel like what we're seeing is kind of the worst of both. Is really like. So yes, there's like this devouring mother sort of archetypal over compassion to the point of crippling, right? Like this, safeguarding and not allowing for, exactly, coddling. No risk will be taken. No triggers can be present. This kind of overprotectiveness that doesn't allow for growth because of that domineering motherness. That's the toxic feminine, right? But then we also see this advent of the if you will, the masculine as represented by order. And so there's such a focus on, I think we talked about last time too, we talked about the zeros and ones, this technocratic breakdown, this mechanization of everything, subdividing and dividing further and making everything into these rigid categories. So I don't know. It's all
I think that I just want to highlight that I haven't really thought of bureaucracy as a masculine thing. I want to meditate more on that because it does have those attributes, but not seeing it as a manifestation of over. I'm sorry to use this term, kind of like an autistic, like a hyper devotion to category above all else, and the loss of humanity in that categorization, that mechanization, that dissection of everything into that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the authoritarianism coming in coming down two columns, right? Through the compassionate overbearing overprotectiveness, and also through the hyper focus on rigidity. So I guess I can see that as being a sort of a masculine and a feminine representation, and kind of the worst of both, like this. So I don't know. Yeah. That didn't really answer your question.
Yeah, like the parents that aren't really in a relationship anymore, but the relationship is kind of so formalized that they kind of just do their own things without really actually harmonizing and bringing the human being to fruition between them.
Yeah, and what's missing in all of that is the humanity and the ethereal, that's what's missing. It's that the center has fallen out and you're left with the crust. It made sense in my mind.
I like that. I like the crust.
I would say, sorry, I'm struggling with my dog here who wishes to bark. I think that women tend to base questions of morality around if needs are being met, because women are designed by nature to meet needs, to bring forth life and sustain life, which is obviously very valuable. And so I'm not in any way, minimizing that. But I think we begin to attribute that we bring forth that part of our nature in areas where it's inappropriate. Like, I feel like college campuses have almost turned into little daycare centers. Like, for example, during exam week at colleges, they now have all these special services to help the students not be stressed. So they bring puppies for the students to play with on the campus, and they have finger painting. And the way I look at that is exam week is meant to be stressful. You are meant to feel like crap. You are meant to pull all-nighters. You are meant to drink coffee. And it's kind of like a little mini version of the hero's journey, which you feel great at the end of exams. And it hopefully gets you ready for some tough things that you're going to face in your life and in the workplace. And while, I love dogs and puppies, I think it's kind of infantilizing that we are so determined to keep everybody, comfortable and babied all of the time. And I really see that as a kind of overgrowth of femininity.
And how does that mash with the hyper policing of social norms at the same time? Like, you're super taken care of, but if you say the wrong thing, bucko, then you're not right. A part anymore.
That's the hypocrisy of it, right? They say all these things, like when anybody objects to, toxic DEI trainings, they say, well, you're going to have to sit with your discomfort. You're going to have to tolerate your discomfort. Oh, but you're stressed out over exams. Here's some finger paints. Those are the same people giving you finger paints. It's all, to me, that's just proof that it's a manipulation. We want you to be uncomfortable when it's to advance our agenda. Yeah. Then it's okay for you to be uncomfortable.
But not to be a competent thinking master of a field that doesn't have to do with DEI. Wow.
Well, and it's kind of an exponential punishment at that point too, because if your discomfort is unacceptable, then telling you that you must have that discomfort is discomfort up. It's like insult to injury. It's
Yeah.
And that example about puppies and finger paints and during exam week being a response to exams feeling stressful, it feels like an over engineering. It's like, yes, it should be, it is by nature a stressful period. But if it's so stressful that we're noticing that something is not working here, maybe this is too stressful for these students, why don't we re-examine what we're doing and see how we can make this process more organic for the student? But instead, we're going to over-engineer that. We're going to add a new layer on top that ameliorates the discomfort in this new way. It's kind of bizarre.
Well, and to be fair to colleges now, I think that the intelligence and the capacity for critical thinking, for even paying attention, for deep reading, has dropped precipitously over the last decade. I think that they're actually dealing with probably people that are 10 years behind where they would have been 10 years ago.
But why is that?
Just the whole corrosion of American education. I think we're totally screwed. I think we're becoming stupider. I think the data bears that out too.
I think so too. And I think that colleges are complicit in that. Yeah. I think that boycott schools.
Educate yourself.
That's right.
Autodidactic or die. Autodidacts. Autodidacts unite. Oh, wait, what does the Optimus Prime say? Is it unite? Autodidacts. Roll out. Oh, sorry. You guys are girls. You don't watch Transformers. Sorry.
I actually had a crush on Optimus Prime.
Whoa. Because it was the tape cassette in his chest, wasn't it? You're like, I could just put anything that I want in there and he'll say it to me.
Never actually thought about that. Big manliness, really.
Yeah.
I guess.
And, you have a thing for truckers, don't you?
No, I never really thought about it. Maybe. Now that you ask.
It's like a mobile waterbed, like somebody driving around the road with a waterbed. Like you just like, I want to be a princess in this man's cab.
My next life.
Why don't you guys plug your work, Common Ground? What are you guys doing? And your show, too.
Solid Ground, yeah.
Solid Ground, yeah.
Yeah, so Solid Ground does a live stream every Monday, usually around 12:45 or 1.
Eastern.
Yeah, Eastern time, thank you.
So 10 o'clock Pacific.
Yeah, 10 Pacific, and it's... sometimes we have guests on, and sometimes it's just the four of us, me, Leslie, Jody, and David, and we're just talking about the issues of the day. And then we also have groups, peer support groups. And we actually have 5 of those, and you can join through locals. It's just $5 a month, and you have access to all the groups. You can come to any one that you want or all of them. And it's a great group of people, all really lovely, independent thinkers. And you can find us on solidground.com. Solidgroundsupport.com. Thank you. Solidgroundsupport.com.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. We're talking about starting a men's group. David will be heading that up. And, we're kind of just open to how things are flowing and forming. We tend to cap the groups off each session. It's about 90-minute session. We do up to about 10 people. So, but as we fill up, we're adding more. We're going to be adding more and more groups. So it's really been wonderful to connect with people, and we get a lot of positive feedback. People are really enjoying it.
Maybe I should have David on specifically for this question, but will the men's group have pancakes or waffles?
Which one's more British?
Oh, he's Brit. Okay. Maybe flapjacks. What do they call them out there? Crepes? Do they have like spotted dick? Maybe will be on the menu.
I've heard of that.
Or steak and kidney pie. Steak and kidney pie would be good.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Beans and mash.
Bangers, right?
Bangers.
Yeah. Ooh, of that.
I don't know what that is.
Oh my God, it's these gorgeous sausages. I'm half British, so I actually like British food. I know intellectually I recognize it is not good cuisine, but it's in my blood, so I can't be held responsible.
What a girl needs. Well, thank you both, ladies, and thanks, Erin, for swinging by.
Yeah, thank you.
Lovely hanging out with you guys.
Absolutely.
It was. Have a wonderful day.